Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, Atlanta. Thank you so much for joining me for an episode of Daily Spark with Dr. Angela, where we enlighten, inspire, and empower you to become your best self. The tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And that's what we want to do today about education. That's right. Are we educated enough? We're talking about teaching to the test. My guest today is Irene Dolnick, and she is out of the El Paso, Texas area. So let me tell you a little bit about Irene. Irene Dolnick has a Master's of Science degree in Education with a specialization in reading literacy from Capella University in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She has her BA degree in psychology from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Irene has worked in Boston for Boston Financial Data Services as a corporate trainer. The company moved to Rhode Island in April of 2000, and she moved with them. The day before that happened, however, her husband was hit by a car in a parking lot. He spent the next year and a half in various rehabilitation skilled nursing facilities. Irene transitioned to education when he was released. She received her master's and worked with Michelle Daniels at Thomas Deering School. She then worked at Tides School, an alternative school for troubled youth. There was an in-house counselor to manage behaviors. Well, like I said, we are talking about education today. Education, and she's an author. So we get to cover a lot of things today, everyone. So let's go on and bring Irene on. Hello, Irene. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Dr. Angela. It's good to be here. I'm so passionate about education for our students and for adults, the parents of our wonderful kids, and teaching to the test and what's going on in the schools. And so this is a subject that I was passionate about when I was getting my master's degree in reading and literacy from Capella, and it transitions to today. I think it's a very important subject and certainly reflective of the society that we live in. So education is extremely important.
Yes, yes. So before I really start to pick your brain, I want to make sure that everyone understands what that terminology means. Can you explain what the term teaching to the test, just what does that mean?
Okay, yes. Teaching to the test is a standardized test that a school selects to reflect the reading, math, and science skills for 2nd to 12th graders. So this, again, is something that the principals determine for that school what particular type of standardized testing that they're going to be using, and the teachers are mandated to make sure that the test scores reach the level that the school needs to receive federal funding for their programs, federal funding for tutoring, and that is really what it is.
Right, right. So are there any, we assume that if our administrators at the school boards have determined that something should be done, we want to assume that they are for the betterment of our students, that that's what, that they have our students' best interest in mind. So are there any benefits to teaching to the test?
Well, in my beliefs, in researching this for my master's degree, and then again just recently, I ran across several articles, one from the National Center for Fair and Open Testing. They did an article on how standardized testing damages education. And it's their conclusion that the No Child Left Behind Act has, and I'm quoting here, unprecedented expansion of standardized testing and test misuse. So What test misuse means, I have my own interpretation and can speak about that just a little later. But they've concluded that that schools are pressurized by administration and by teachers to use a test to measure learning and achievement gaps by different population segments of our population, and teacher school quality. And if the school doesn't meet the, as I said, the average yearly goal that's determined by the school, then penalties are imposed on the school and management. If the standardized testing does not improve, then management is fired. And I can give you a local story here, where one of our school districts, it's not the one I work for, but it's another school district that found collusion. There was collusion found between the teachers and administrators. They pressurized, they pressured the teacher to and the students to meet these goals, and they were found to fake test scores.
Yes,
so
I think many of the listeners will probably remember that in the news as well.
So this is not just something that is just gone on here, but I met a teacher yesterday. His name is Oscar Vega, and he used to live in the Detroit area and was telling me that Bessie DeVos used to be in charge of the particular school district and charter schools, and that the schools had to declare bankruptcy, and the test scores now are so bad that a finance manager has been instituted to again issue standardized testing, which was already proven to be incorrect because the schools have failed. And so it's his hypothesis that giving another test on how to improve curriculum and help the students to achieve what they need to achieve in education is going to help after all these years of issuing standardized testing. And it was proven that these tests do not help the teacher, and they don't do it.
And it's really interesting because, I think that overall, people have been saying that, there's been murmuring amongst parents, there's been murmuring amongst teachers, and it's just allow us to do it a little bit differently so that we can really seem to help the student the way that the individual student needs our assistance, instead of it seems like now it's more of a one size fits all. So it sounds like there are so many pitfalls to the way that we're doing it now. Am I hearing you correctly, that it's just not working?
Yes, it is. And they found that out of the 21 states, out of the 50, 21 passed. So 21 schools out of the 50 have achieved the average yearly progress goals, and the schools are actually doing well. So that's not even half. That's just less than half. And the argument is, well, then if standardized testing does not help the schools or the students, then what do we use to measure teacher effectiveness? And teachers have so many resources, and this is why I wrote Kurtger, Jasmine, and Bagel. It's a series that focuses on concepts that are important to not only everyday life, but also assists the kids in taking a standardized test, which I'm really against, but such as rhyming words. My book has rhyming words. My book covers and clusters certain word families that a reading specialist would cover. Now, I do it a little differently because in the first book I cover SH words with CH words, TH words, so that a student can notice the difference between the beginning sound as a sh, cha, sa, and wa. So I cover that and cluster that in the last, I'll say 15 pages of the book. The beginning of the first book covers the vowel before an R, whether it's A, E, I, O, or U, before the R. That's considered a controlled word.
Irene?
Oh, hi. Sorry. For some reason, I blurted out.
Yeah,
But anyway.
no worries. So let's see. We're gonna put a space right there, and then I
Sure.
want you to complete your thought. Okay, so I'm gonna pause so they can cut that out.
Okay.
Okay, so you were saying that the way that you do it is that you like to teach certain clusters of sounds together.
Yes. Now, these clusters are different than would be covered in a reading program, such as a Wilson reading program. They cluster certain sounds and cover certain sounds according to their method of teaching reading. I clustered sounds that are very similar, such as the SH, TH, W, WH, and CH together, and that's covered in the last half of my first book. I cover the vowel with the R. It's considered a controlled R word, such as Mert Lane. So you hear in Mert Lane, you hear the consonants, the M, the R, and the T. So in the first half of the book, the pronunciation is underneath the word. Mm-hmm. In the second book, I cover a different cluster of TCH words, and the pronunciation is next to the word, such as Natcher, Mr. Natcher. He's the cat who's chasing Bagel and Jasmine. So the pronunciation is next to the word, and it has a dictionary at the bottom for all the word families that I cover. In the third book, Kurt, Jasmine, and Bagel, A Halloween Adventure, there I cover different sounds altogether, and what I did was I covered them in the word itself. So the words are segmented into syllables. So the pronunciation is not underneath the word, as in the second book, as in the first book, the first book, or next to the word, as in the second book. It's the actual word itself that's divided into syllables with the dictionary at the bottom. And this new format of helping the reader attach to the characters will then help the students to focus on their adventures, or the adventures of Kurt, Jasmine, and Bagel, as they go through life. And part of the book is non-fictional, in that some of the concepts, such as homelessness or friendship, were concepts that students taught me that they were concerned about. And let me give you an example. Kids used to start crying, and they used to say, Miss, she's talking to, so it was their friend was talking to someone else, and I had to transition them into a more positive view of what was happening to them. And this is one of the topics that I cover in the book, homelessness and friendship. And Jasmine is homeless, and she meets Bagel, and so now they're going to a restaurant and going to plan their adventures. And she actually says, well, I'm afraid of losing you. And he says to her, don't be worried, silly. We're going to have a lot of friends. Think of all the friendships that we're going to make. And so this transitions them to a more positive view of life, from loss to a gain, a gainful experience. So
that what a wonderful way to help children understand and be able to make a better transition, and they can relate and still be able to understand it and not be too heavy on them, even though it may be a heavy topic of homelessness or not being sure about themselves. What a wonderful way of doing that. Well, before we go to break, I want to make sure that everyone can find you on the internet, Irene. How should people get in contact with you, or how can they find you?
Our website is www.adventureswithKurt, so they're all small letters all run together. Adventures with Kurt, K-U-R-T, Gert, G-E-R-T, Jasmine, J-A-Z-M-I-N-E, and bagel.com.
All righty, listeners, we'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Chester. Today, my guest is Irene Dolnick, and she is out of the El Paso, Texas area. And we're talking about education, but she's also an author. So her wonderful way of sharing and teaching our youth about the things that are really affecting them in their day-to-day life in a way that is appropriate. But guess what? We're also talking about testing. And are we doing enough? Are we educated enough? Is the way that we're doing it proper for today's students? Is it empowering them, or is it just the same old, same old? So, Irene, one question that I have for you when we're talking about, testing and are we educated enough is that there are some impressions or some understandings that our reading and writing abilities, that the way that we're doing it is okay. Um, do you think that it's okay, or do you think that some things need to be changed? And if so, how do you think we should go about implementing the new ideas or theories for our students?
Well, I think the first would be to modify the teaching to the test, because teachers are creators. They love their kids and they want to help them. And they have a plethora of just great ideas on how to measure progress. So, for example, a teacher can start with a before and after test. So at the first day of school, they can ask a student to write a paragraph about their summer vacation, and that would be considered the before example of their current abilities. Then, say, 10 weeks into the session, after they've taught them how to, capitalize certain pronouns and paragraph structure and the use of adverbs and adjectives to make their writing a little more graphic and visual, then they can use an after test to measure their progress there, so that they'll see what their progress has been and what they need to improve on or concentrate on. And there's debates. Teachers know all this. They're very creative people. Presentations, portfolios, plays. So there's numerous ways that teachers have to measure performance over a school year. It doesn't have to be mandated, such as teaching to the test, where I've seen kids just start shaking their leg in nervousness, wringing their hands, and just staring into just space, like they're mesmerized by this and overwhelmed by this experience. And it's not good for the students. And there was actually a 9-year study conducted by the National Research Council, and they concluded that testing yielded little results but caused significant harm. So this 9-year study by the National Research Council and what I spoke about earlier, the article by the National Center for Fair and Open Testing, the article titled How Standardized Testing Damages Education, are just further examples of what's going on in the school districts throughout the United States, with 21 out of the 50 schools actually achieving their goal. And it's very it's very sad. What I tried to do in addition to my books is to created a Kirker, Jasmine, and Bagel Writing Academy. So what I did was, in several schools that I go to, that students had to write a paper, and I could see their writing block. It took 25 minutes just to think about, what they were going to write, whether it was their Thanksgiving vacation supper, or it doesn't matter, their Christmas vacation, or their summer experience. It doesn't matter. That they had such a writer's block, and they were thinking and thinking.
So,
end of the period.
It didn't take them 25 minutes. You're saying it didn't take them 25 minutes to write the paper. It took them 25 minutes to come up with the concept of what they wanted to write about? Oh, wow.
Exactly. So what I've done was I've actually, in Kirkwood Jasmine and Bagel Writing Academy, I've actually developed a strategy to help them. And so I can only accept like 10 students because we work through Skype. And I teach them, 5-minute strategy on releasing negative thoughts, and then we go through strategies of writing and how to write and create their own vision of whatever topic that they're focusing on. So they learn a lot of strategies, and unfortunately I can only accept, 10 students. I have a student now, Leslie Cabral, who has written a book, and we're focusing on her publishing this book, and we're editing her creation, and so I'm really proud of her. And this is going to be updated for our website. The Lit Fire does have the pictures and some of her stories. So she was part of the Writing Academy for older students. So I'm really, really proud of her. She's doing a great job. So students can overcome their writing challenges, and it's very easy to. And I think that the teachers in the classroom can actually have their own strategies. They are overwhelmed by student misbehavior by teaching to the test, so that hampers their ability. And I don't see a lot of diversification of curriculum for handicapped. It seems that just teaching to the test does not meet their needs because they're slower. They need the time to think through their disability, but they're just as creative.
Right. Now you touched on a few things, and one that really seems to resonate, especially in city schools or extremely large states where there's so many students in a classroom. And I love that you said that you only allow 10 students in your writing academy, where there are so many school systems where the students themselves complain because they're saying it's 30 kids in a classroom, and there's one teacher, or they may have one teacher's assistant, and that is just in my humble opinion, that is just too many students in one classroom. So how do you think we could fix it? Is there an easy fix, or is there kind of long-term things that we could do that could get this back down to a manageable size where our students are the focus instead of the testing as much?
Well, it's again to empower the teacher to use her creative skills and to make teaching to the test a minimum school goal rather than the maximum school goal, so that the teaching assistant can actually focus on those students who need help. Because a teacher can be overwhelmed by so many students raising their hands, and she has to concentrate on each individual student and what that student needs. I've seen a lot of students writing a paragraph with and. I went to the store, and then I went to my grandmother's house, and then I had biscuits. Their thoughts really aren't on paper aren't meeting the goals that they need to meet to pass any writing test. I know that when I was at the University of Massachusetts, I had to pass a writing test. They gave you a writing test at the end of the curriculum, and you had to pass it. They're looking for a particular format, but that's okay. That's the problem with teaching to the test. They're looking for a format, not whether you're creative. And your approach, and that's what a portfolio does. A portfolio enables the child to present their work at the beginning of the classroom period, and then every 10 weeks or 9 weeks, or even at the end of their last day of school, you can see the progress that they made in the writing in their writing experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, would you say that with your experience with everything that you've seen and with so not just with your education, but just with living life and seeing what you've seen being in the school system, is that what kind of sparked your desire to become an author and to kind of take it to the next level to help the student?
Yes, because I found that a lot of children here in the El Paso area are homeless. And I see what it does to their identity, to their self-concepts, how they describe themselves. And let me give you an example. I was covering for a teacher, and it was a student's birthday. So his mother brings in a bunch of cupcakes for the class. Unfortunately, there were students from another class that were integrated into our classroom. So the bottom line is that we didn't have enough cupcakes. He was generous enough to give a cupcake to us. Another girl didn't have one, and then he started crying. And so I said, "Why are you crying?" And he said, "Because I don't have a cupcake." And I said, "Well, I know it's your birthday, but why don't I do this?" My third book had just come out, and I said, I'm going to give this to you. And I endorsed the book to the student. And, I said, now he said, I can't accept this. I said, why can't you accept this? He says, I don't deserve it. I said, why don't you deserve it? Did you rob a bank? He said, no. I said, do you have, did you murder anyone? He says, no. This was a fifth grader, so he didn't know what these concepts were. And then he says, but I don't necessarily know where I'm going to be tomorrow. And it's just, I've seen this concept and how it damages a student's identity and how they learn in school. And this is not the first example. That's why I included that concept in my first book, where Jazz and Bagel are homeless. And you can tell they're homeless because they don't have coats on, and Kurt and Gert do. And so, so it's...
Wow.
So every little thing
some of the small things. Yeah.
Every little thing affects them.
And I like how you had the forethought to think of it in a way that the student, that even a very young student, would be able to come to a conclusion without necessarily having to be told. That they could just look at the picture and notice something like that. What a wonderful way of reaching them and being and just being mindful of what they're experiencing and what they need, and touching on it in a very kind and gentle way without it being more pressure, or without it being more embarrassing, or kind of making it too loud. So, but you're still addressing it and still wanting to help. It seems like that, from what you're saying, that's also a fear of some of the students, is that being homeless will be too loud for them, that everyone will know, and people may think something about me. So yeah. That is a really, I'm really glad that you addressed that. So it's almost time for us to go to break, and just in case someone came in, I read a little bit later to the show, I want to make sure that everyone is able to find you once we are done here, because you guys, you have to pick up this book. It is the cutest book in all the world. Where can everyone find you, Irene?
At www.adventures with Kurt, K-U-R-T, Gert, G-E-R-T, Jasmine, J-A-Z-M-I-N-E, and Bagel, BAGEL.com. And also we're on Amazon as well.
All righty, listeners, go get your copy. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Chester. Are we educated enough, or are we simply teaching to the test? that is the question that is being addressed today with my guest, Irene Dolnick, and she is out of the El Paso, Texas area. And she is an author, she is an educator, so we are covering a little bit of both. Now, I absolutely love that question, Irene, that you are posing not only to the folks that are in the El Paso area, but a great question to pose to our country as a whole. Are we educated enough? Can you explain what you mean by that question?
What I mean is that after we have completed our education, whether it's a high school diploma and we go to a technical school, or whether we get a bachelor's degree, or whether we get a master's degree or PhD, it's our obligation to ourselves and to the world to ask critical questions and not accept what is a rationalization for a given behavior. And let me give you an example. Let's talk about, say, the decision to go to war. Are we asking the right questions and posing these questions to our representatives? Are we asking questions like, why can't we use diplomacy? Has diplomacy worked before? Now, the answer is no. Supposedly, diplomacy hasn't worked. So then you want to not just stop there, but ask additional questions. All of this asking questions is considered critical thinking skills. And these are skills that are developed in the classroom from debates, from conversations and critical thinking about an article or a book that you read, and not from a teaching to the test, where you're learning strategies on how to improve your test grade. You're not asking questions about what's going on in the world. So as a parent, you would want to know, well, why are you continuing to use a test or as a primary source of the educational tool? Why aren't teachers given more leeway to create their own strategies that help students to engage in that conversation of education and ask questions? Mm-hmm. And this is where we are letting ourselves down and not meeting our own personal goals, because we're struggling through a society that has its own, that's being defined by other people, when we can ask questions and kind of modify what's going on.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned critical thinking. Is that something that should be taught early on, or do you think that's something that should be implemented slowly, or do we just need that in high school? In your opinion, when is the perfect time to start teaching critical thinking?
I think the critical thinking skills can be developed from pre-K on to the 12th grade. Mm-hmm. So it's just a matter of how the teacher wants to acquaint the student, say a pre-K student, to, say, a museum or a book. Now, usually at that level, you want to focus on the pictures, not so much on the words, but, mm-hmm. Asking them questions. Well, how does this picture tie into, or what kind of memories do you have about this picture and, say, your grandmother's house, or mm-hmm. Or going to the store, or so you develop an awareness of the environment, and having the students start to question, oh yeah, there is a correlation here between this picture and my mother's house or my grandmother's house, or going to the store, going to the movie to watch, Star Wars, or mm-hmm. Anything that we have in our society. It's just a matter of making sure that they correlate, that there right. is a transition from that concept to real life, and that's what reading does. Reading mm-hmm. actually helps students identify and link reading concepts to the real world. And that's why I think education is so important, and asking questions is so important. And so to answer your question, are we educated enough? We need to ask more questions, and that will help improve our lives and the lives of the world around us.
And it's really interesting that many times I have found that people don't understand when a student actually has questions. They feel as though the student is almost challenging their authority as opposed to trying to dig deeper and wanting more information and challenging themselves to understand and to go to the next level. So I'm so glad that you said, ask the questions. Let's make sure that we've covered everything before we go on to the next step, that perhaps we just forgot to ask the right question as opposed to some other option. So would you say that your findings or your belief about teaching to the test is that we need to start implementing a new way of doing things to be able to better assist our students?
Yes, but I don't know if this is going to be reasonable with this administration. I just, especially with Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, I don't know if it's going to filter down from the president and his ideas to Betsy DeVos to the actual schools, because there's too much evidence that teaching to the test is not working. And before the elections, I went to middle school schoolers, and I asked, well, who would you like to see as president? And these were social studies classes. And so, you can find a link between past presidents and even presidents for today. Their behavior is very similar, and such as even Andrew Jackson had a lot of qualities that are very similar to President Trump. And I would ask them, okay, based on what evidence are you giving me this answer? Based on what evidence do you believe that this is a good choice? And they really, Make America Great Again was the answer. Okay, well, then give me, how are you going to make America great again? How are you going to do this? We're already great. So what needs improvement? And let's go with, and nobody said anything. So they bought the dialogue of Make America Great Again and all these marketing words, but the evidence wasn't there. And this is where critical thinking skills comes into play, especially in social studies or even reading, where you have some, you read poems that are historical in nature, and you can see the link between that poem and what's going on today. So it doesn't necessarily have to be history or social studies, but actually reading the poems that are historical. And there's a lot of alignment, and we can certainly teach kids how to make the transition to a world attachment, which is what reading is supposed to be. It attaches the reader to the text and to the world around us.
So when you talk to students, and I love that you kind of get out there and that you do ask them questions and you do want to know how do they feel about stuff. And I think that for some children, that's really needed, because there may be some adults in their life that don't ask them for their opinion or how they feel about things, and your asking is a wonderful thing. So when you talk to students about all of this test taking that they're doing, what has been their answer? Are they excited about the test, or they wish testing would go away, or somewhere in between?
No, they're not excited. Some are just don't answer. They don't answer you, and then others hem and haw, and then they give you an answer. So the first response is generally the more accurate one. And so that, along with, like I said, the test anxiety that I see going to the bathroom. When you're taking the test, there's certain procedures for going to the bathroom, and it's just something that kids should not be exposed to
Right.
early in their life. They need to know how to minimize anxiety and how to change that anxiety into more appropriate behavior where they're not focusing so much on how they feel, but working it out so that they don't have problems later with fears or anxiety or with people. So that's those are my beliefs.
And you mentioned it right there. There are so many students that express that test taking does cause them to be anxious. That for many, even the day before, I've had many parents come to me and say, what can my student do? Because I've noticed that at certain times of the year or when certain projects, it's time for certain things to be done, that they don't want to eat, or they're having a hard time going to sleep, or they just seem to be a little extra moody, so on and so forth. And it really and truly is having an effect on our students. So some students take tests quite fine. They're able to deal with that challenge, but there are just as many that are struggling and are having a really hard time. I have a friend who's a teacher, and she says, I do certain things, how you're saying that teachers are creative people and that they have the ability to do certain things. This teacher friend of mine has a little bit of time beforehand, and she teaches elementary students, and she says, I let them kind of get up, and we put on like a wiggle, wiggle, wiggle song, and we get all of those little jittery bugs out, and she says that, and she's been teaching, for quite a long time, and I just love how she's so kind with them and how she understands and says, let's get those jitterbugs out, and the kids just stomp and wiggle, and they put on a happy little song, and and they laugh and all of that, and she's just the things that she does to help calm them and say, okay, we're going to do this, but everyone's going to pass because I know you are. I believe in you guys. Let's go. And just those positive things that she does to really put them at ease. And I have to agree with you. Each teacher really and truly does have an effect on our students. And it's amazing how they could make a difference in all that they do. Irene, I have really, truly enjoyed my time with you today. Thank you so much for coming on the show and spending time with us. Before we leave, I want to make sure that everyone is able to find you on the internet. What are the best ways to get in contact with you?
Well, somebody can either email me at irenedolnick@yahoo.com. They can go to the website at www.adventureswithkurt, K-U-R-T, Gert, G-E-R-T, Jasmine, J-A-Z-M-I-N-E, and Bagel, B-A-G-E-L.com. We're also on Amazon. And so I'd be happy to hear from anyone who would like to write to me.
Yes. And again, thank you so much, Irene, for spending time with me today.
Thank you, Dr. Angela. It was a pleasure.
And thank you, listeners, for joining me here on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. We hope that you too have enjoyed the show. I will see you here next week, Mondays, 10 a.m. Have a great day, Atlanta. Bye-bye.